When you run away from home, you learn pretty quickly not to expect much from adults. Not because they're all bad, but because help usually comes with strings, and kindness always has an expiration date. So when he pulled over on Highway 39 and said, "I'm going your way," I didn't feel afraid, but I definitely felt wary. I was 15 and pretending I wasn't, standing with my thumb out, tired, telling myself I looked older than I was because I needed to believe that. Most cars passed without slowing. A few slowed and didn't stop. The ones that did stop usually wanted something in return. This man didn't. He didn't ask my age. He didn't ask where I was sleeping. He didn't ask why I was alone. He just talked. About the road, about the canyon, about the dam and what it was built for. He had a small video camera, a real video camera, not a phone, and kept stopping to film things most people drove past without noticing. He narrated quietly, like he was explaining California to friends. And he spoke to me like I belonged in the conversation. That shouldn't have stood out, but it did. At the time, I kept waiting for the moment when the tone would change. That question that would cross a line. The kindness that came with a price. When you're young and you're on your own, you learn to listen for those shifts. The way a voice lowers. The way curiosity turns personal. It never happened. I was 15 years old the day I decided to take a trip up Highway 39. Not because I was brave, not because I was reckless. I had been away from home for a couple of years, and to me, standing in one place felt worse than moving forward, and Highway 39 was my track. I had been traveling up and down that canyon road since I was a kid, and my parents had discovered Falling Springs. Way back in the day, Falling Springs was the place where the Hollywood elite would go to party and get away from the city for a while. It had swimming pools, a tennis court, a 9-hole putting green, and cabins you could rent that were filled with really cool old antiques. It had a cute little diner called Diamond Jan's Cafe, and the tables were handmade with trees felled on that mountain. My mother and stepfather were married up there, with an aisle for my mother to walk up that had been made of ferns. I haven't been up there in decades. I hear it went to ruin after a fire. The morning air in Azusa was already warming up, the kind of California heat that creeps in quietly and then refuses to leave. I had my backpack slung over one shoulder, too light for a real trip, too heavy for someone pretending they were just out for a walk. My thumb stuck out automatically, muscle memory. I'd been traveling like this for a while now. On my right, the Altadena Dairy stretched out for about a mile. They had a couple of buffalo behind thick fencing, massive and still, like they'd been dropped there by mistake. Beyond them, beyond the little dairy building, rows and rows of cows. The smell hit before the sight. Sharp, sour, unavoidable. It clung to everything. Even now, years later, I can still smell it if I think hard enough. That smell followed me as I walked north. I passed the cutoff for the El Encanto Inn, and then there sat the Canyon Inn, built entirely from rock, low and sturdy, like it had grown straight out of the mountain. A long time ago, people brought their own steaks and cooked them right on the table. I remembered the dark bar, laughter, smoke, the clink of glasses. I remember stealing cherries from the bartender's setup tray. Things that felt impossibly far away from where I was standing. After that, the road changes. The highway begins to curl inward, climbing, narrowing, turning into something that felt less like a city road and more like a road to who knows where. The canyons closed in, tall cliffs on one side and a steep drop-off on the other. Sound shifted. Cars echoed differently up there, like the mountains are listening. I caught a ride from the Canyon Inn, the driver saying he was headed to the Morris Dam. He didn't ask many questions, which was a relief. I think he thought it was a great idea to pick up this cute girl, but the reality unnerved him a bit. When we reached the turnout, he slowed, apologized, said he was heading back down. I just nodded, thanked him for the ride, and stepped out. The dam loomed behind me, concrete, massive, quiet in that heavy way that makes you feel small. It was built in 1934 and was used at one time by the Navy to test bombs. Water sat perfectly still, like it was holding its breath. I adjusted my backpack, stuck my thumb back out, and told myself I'd keep going. Crystal Lake was still ahead, and I was determined to get there before nightfall. So I stuck my thumb out again. That's when this compact sedan pulled into the turnout, and a man stepped out holding a video camera. Not a phone, a real camera. He pointed it at the dam first, narrating as he walked, talking about what it was used for, how long it had been there, how long he'd always wanted to see something like this. Only then did he notice me. He lowered the camera, surprised but curious. He noticed my thumb out and asked where I was headed. "Crystal Lake," I said. He laughed, a little disbelieving. "That's where I'm going." We talked for a minute. His name was Steve. He was from Ohio, first time in California, first time in the mountains, first time talking to a hitchhiker. He told me the video was just for family and friends back home. Something to show them when he returned. Proof he'd really been here. Then he made me an offer. He said he'd give me a ride if I was okay being filmed. I thought about it. I thought about the road, the dam, the way the mountains rose like they didn't care whether I said yes or no, and the fact that this was a weekday, which meant that traffic was practically nil. He seemed like a nice guy. So I smiled and said sure. Steve's face lit up like Christmas. He asked if we could stage the first shot. I giggled and said, "Absolutely. What's my direction?" So he pulled the car back onto the road, rolled forward slowly, camera running. I stood on the shoulder, thumb out, hair tangled by the breeze coming off the canyon. As he rolled up, I leaned toward the window and said for the camera, "Going my way?" After he got the shot, we both laughed. And just like that, we were on our way. We talked as the road climbed. Nothing important, nothing invasive, just the kind of conversation people have when they're passing through the same place at the same time. He never asked me where I'd come from or where I was going next. He never tried to turn the moment into something it wasn't. And I realized something quietly, sitting in that passenger seat. I was braced for harm that wasn't coming. My body didn't know how to relax around someone who wasn't asking for anything. I didn't yet understand that not every adult saw a runaway as an opportunity. That some people really did just help because it was the decent thing to do. Steve filmed everything. The curves of the road, the guardrails hugging the cliffs, the drop-offs that made my stomach flip even though I tried not to show it. He asked me to narrate what we were seeing, where we were, what it felt like. So I did. I talked about the way the canyon opened and closed, how sometimes you could see miles ahead and sometimes only the next turn. I pointed out creeks cutting through rock, places where the water had carved paths long before either of us existed. We stopped a few times, once by the cutoff for the East Fork Bridge. He wanted to go across, but I declined. "Bad memories," I said. He filmed trees taller than anything he'd seen back home. Sun-bleached signs warning about falling rocks. Patches of snow tucked into shadows even though it was warm everywhere else. At one turnout, we stood quietly for a moment. No camera, no talking, Just wind through the branches and the faint sound of water somewhere down below. I don't know what Steve was thinking. I know what I was. I was thinking that this stretch of road, this borrowed moment, felt like a pause, like the world had hit stop just long enough for me to breathe. We talked about Ohio, flat land, cornfields, winters that went on forever. He asked me about California, about my life, and why I was on the road. The drive took longer than I expected. Mountain roads always do. By the time the Crystal Lake Camp store came into view, the sun was lower, light turning golden, skimming the tops of the trees. The lake sat quiet and reflective, surrounded by forest like it was being protected. We got out of the car, Steve looking up in wonder at the tall pine trees. He pulled his camera out of the car and asked if I would mind standing by the Crystal Lake sign, which showed the elevation. I gave him a nice pose, doing the Vanna White with the signage. Steve turned off the camera. This part wasn't for filming. He took me into the small store they had for campers and sightseers. He bought me a few bottles of water and some food, some of it hot for eating now, some in packages for eating later. Then he wished me luck, told me to be careful, said he'd never forget this day. I thanked him for the ride, for the company, for the food, and for treating me like a person instead of a problem. Then he drove away, disappearing down the road, his adventure continuing on to Angel's Crest Highway. No lingering, no conditions, no story attached. I stood there for a moment, watching the dust settle. For a long time after, I didn't talk about that day. It didn't fit the narrative I was building in my head, the one where the world was sharp and everyone was dangerous and I had to stay hard just to survive. But now, looking back, I understand why that day stayed with me. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing went wrong. Nothing happened. And that's what made it matter. Because when you grow up without safety rails, decency feels extraordinary. It feels suspicious. It feels fragile, like it could disappear if you breathe wrong. That man didn't save me. He didn't fix anything. He didn't change the course of my life. But he gave me something I didn't have words for yet. Proof that kindness could exist without cost. And sometimes that's enough to carry with you for years.